What's up everyone, Tera Roberts here with FantasyPros. Today we are talking my top 10 riskiest wide receivers to draft based off their current ADP. While these receivers may do well for their actual teams, they're going to be riskier picks for your team based off where you have to draft them. Mike Evans. With a current ADP of wide receiver 13, I am definitely avoiding Mike Evans this season. While the Tampa Bay offense should be excellent, there are a ton of mouths to feed. 3 all-pro mouths to feed, with Mike Evans, Antonio Brown, and Chris Godwin. And of those 3, Evans is the one with the highest ADP and is very touchdown dependent. In 2020, he caught 13 touchdowns with 1,000 yards, but that was with Godwin missing time due to injury and Brown only playing half of the season. If all 3 play a full season, the production for Evans in 2021 might be a little too volatile for me to have him as my wide receiver 1. Next up, we have Tyler Lockett at wide receiver 20. Lockett was a top 10 receiver in PPR last season, but he was an extremely boom or bust player. He lavished you with games of over 100 yards and 3 touchdowns, but coupled it with multiple games of less than 40 yards and no touchdowns. Ouch! I'm optimistic that Seattle will solve this boom or bust nature and create more consistency within the offense, but that optimism is not a guarantee. So at this point, Tyler Lockett is on the riskier side of picks. At wide receiver 29, Michael Thomas seems like a steal for someone who could be a top 10 receiver when he returns to health. But we saw what happened with his injury in 2020, and for that reason, he's still too risky. Thomas could miss up to 12 weeks, and that does mean that if the timeline is correct, he will still give you valuable time this season. But banking on that timetable being accurate for an injury that's caused some inaccurate timetables for him in the past is a gamble. Especially when you combine that with a questionable quarterback situation and being unhappy within the organization. Unfortunately, I'm passing on Michael Thomas. At wide receiver 30, JuJu SmithSchuster is another risky receiver. His teammates Diontae Johnson and Chase Claypool sit at wide receiver 22 and 28 respectively. That's 3 receivers on the same team bunched up within 10 spots of each other. Seems like a recipe for disaster. Diontae Johnson will be the leader in targets, and where I worry for JuJu is that it's likely that Claypool makes a leap in his second year. And a Claypool leap will put JuJu as the 3rd option in the receiving core, making him too risky at his ADP, with options like Courtland Sutton and Deebo Samuel around a similar ADP. At wide receiver 34, we have DJ Chark. While I do like Chark and I do not hold his 2020 numbers against him, the wide receiver situation in Jacksonville could go so many different directions, so he's a risky option for me at his ADP. Laviska Shenault has been coming on strong in training camp and sits at wide receiver 42, while Marvin Jones may not be the flashiest player in the world. He sits at wide receiver 54 and can be a nice security blanket for a rookie quarterback. All of this makes Chark a potentially risky option. Instead, I would actually look at other options in the Jags offense at more favorable ADPs. Let's keep it going and head up 1 spot to wide receiver 35, Devonta Smith. I absolutely love the talent and potential for the future, and I love that he steps into potentially be the #1 receiving option right off the bat, but I don't love all the rumors that are swirling around the Eagles. Is there a trade? Do they really believe in Hurts? Do we really know Hurts' true potential within the pass game as well? It's a very small sample size. So with all of that, unfortunately, Smith also has an injury that has kept him off the field, and I just feel like there are safer options to go with in this ADP range. Next up, we have Tyler Boyd. I've typically been a huge Tyler Boyd fan in past years, but with the addition of Ja'Marr Chase, Boyd's ADP is too high for me as the 3rd option on his team, even if that team is going to throw the ball a ridiculous amount of times. He's currently wide receiver 37 ahead of guys like Brandon Cook and Antonio Brown. He's also someone who has thrived off of targets versus touchdowns, and if those targets thin out, he would take a dramatic hit in production. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to pass on Boyd. Next up, we have Curtis Samuel. I'm skeptical of Curtis Samuel at wide receiver 44. Other options in that ADP range include guys like Marquise Brown, Laviska Shenault, Corey Davis, Devontae Parker, and Mike Williams. It's just an ADP range with a lot of potential. Last year, Samuel was an incredible value, and this year, he's someone who can still provide you with a solid floor, but now he's back with Ron Rivera, and I say but because Samuel's best year was last year, under Matt Rule. Samuel had multiple games of over 100 yards and 8+ targets, but under Rivera, most of his yards per game ranged between 20 to 60, and there's also a lot of new talent to evaluate. And with Samuel missing training camp, that's more opportunity for talent to shine. In my opinion, there are better options to go with in that ADP range. At number 9 on my list, we have Michael Gallup, wide receiver 47, and the third option in Dallas. With the return of Dak, Dallas is poised to be an offensive juggernaut. And Gallup has typically been a good value receiver, but all signs point to CeeDee Lamb making a leap in 2021, and I am firmly on that hype train. It's a leap that could put the 2020 first-round draft pick in the top 15 of receivers this year. And then there's Amari Cooper, who's been in the top 15 for the past 2 years. For Dallas to have 2 top receivers plus a running back who's been known to give double-digit targets, something's gotta give. And unfortunately, I think it gives on Gallup, making him too risky of a pick for his ADP. And at number 10, we have Henry Ruggs, wide receiver 50. It's not that I think Ruggs' ADP is wildly off, I just don't see his targets increasing enough to give the return that people are expecting. Ruggs never saw more than 5 targets per game last year, and the biggest issue for Ruggs sits at wide receiver 76, John Brown. Brown's 2020 injury hindered his production, but in 2019, he had 72 receptions, over 1,000 yards, and 6 touchdowns. If Brown stays healthy, he can play the same role that Nelson Aguilar played. Add in Kenyon Drake to the mix, who seems to be poised to play a significant role in the pass game, and suddenly Ruggs is looking a little more volatile than I feel comfortable with drafting. And that wraps up my top 10 riskiest wide receivers. Make sure you're following us at FantasyPros across all platforms so that you don't miss any of the content that we have coming up for the 2021 season.